Greetings out there, all you disembodied flesh sacks. It's time for yet another exciting media critique. Today, I figured we're going to talk about the new Fallout TV show that just came out. And boy howdy, does this look like a mess of garbled trash to me.
You keep having it fun, you lucky son of a gun, on a honky-tonk hardwood floor.
So I didn't even know there was a Fallout TV show coming out, but then I went over to my nephew's house and he had this shit on the TV and he was like, "Oh wow, this just came out. Looky, this just came out, Nick." And I was like, "This looks like ass. This is fucking cowboy, and it's like the fakest shit, and it's just filmed in like the Hollywood Hills. Why is every movie or TV show ever filmed in the Hollywood Hills? I wish every movie or TV show was like filmed next to Cherry Creek or something. That'd be pretty fucking hilarious, wouldn't it? And everyone just accepts that like all these movies and TV shows are filmed in like the fucking Hollywood Hills. Like, wow, it's the world's most boring setting. Fucking hills. But anyway, I didn't watch the show. I just watched like the first scene because that's all I could fucking stand of this shit. It's like this cowboy and, you know, all the people overlooking the retro-futuristic Fallout city, and then the cowboy rides away on his horse and they try and escape the atomic bombs they're dropping. You know, I don't have streaming services. My nephew does, but I fucking don't because I don't watch trash on streaming. So then like the atomic bombs drop and this fucking idiot cowboy thinks he can like outride the atomic bomb on his fucking horse. Which, you know, you could say that's naivety on his part, but I think it just goes to show that the people who make Fallout don't understand how atomic bombs work, or how Fallout works, which is kind of ironic considering that the whole fucking game series is named Fallout. Because I guess that some of these people think that Fallout will like make you a ghoul or whatever, you know, like a zombie mutant. Actually, it just makes you like Robert Oppenheimer and you just get cancer and you die really early. And that's the actual effect of nuclear fallout. So I guess someone at Bethesda Studios didn't get the memo on that one. But suffice to say, the new Fallout TV show looks like a real fucking train wreck, and will really live up to the legacy of Fallout as an embarrassing property that is a total disgrace to science fiction as a genre, and retrofuturism as a subgenre of science fiction. And is overall just like one of the worst video games of all time and one of the worst things of all time. But I don't think I've ever actually bothered to make a full-on video about Fallout before. And I figured that now the Fallout show is out, this could be my ticket to success. This could be a big, popular, successful video that finally carries me to mainstream success in the YouTube algorithm. Even though what actually happens is that all my videos get like 200 views at the most, and then their growth just completely peters out. And then like once per month I get this weird surge of like 500 views, and then it drops back down to nothing. And I have no idea what that's about, or why the hell YouTube's algorithm would just give me a random surge in views once per month at the exact same time and then drop back down to nothing. But I guess the algorithm is just broken or whatever, because as far as I'm concerned, I produce the most fucking quality content on the internet, baby. So, anyway, let's talk about my problems with Fallout for a while. It's not just that fake, like, marble Nuka-Cola bottle that they pretended to sell, but then it was just plastic. Which, you know, that is a scam, and they really shouldn't cheat their gullible gamer audience out of money like that. But paying for video games to begin with is a scam, because you should just pay for movies and books and legitimate forms of art. But, you know, I guess Bethesda Studios doesn't really have any morals in that department. So, of course, they try to sell all these suckers some shitty Nuka-Cola that probably tastes like piss water. I proudly drink Squirt because I'm a Coloradan. And it's not just that Fallout doesn't talk about what happened to Denver in the aftermath of the nuclear war or whatever either. Although that is a continuous gripe that I have with pretty much every AAA video game series, like Grand Theft Auto. It's like, wow, this is such a funny parody of Los Angeles. Wow, this is such an accurate parody of Miami. Where's the fucking parody of Denver, you losers? Where's the fucking parody of Colfax? I want to see that shit. I don't give a fuck about seeing a parody of Los Angeles. I've never been to Los Angeles. I don't care about San Andreas. Where's the funny parody of Denver? Let's get that going. So Fallout doesn't cover Denver, obviously. I don't think it even mentions Denver once. There's like multiple Canadian characters in Fallout. They bother to give Canada a bunch of coverage. But where's the coverage of Denver? What the fuck happens to Denver in the Fallout universe? That's the first thing I wonder with every fictional universe. What the fuck does Denver look like in this universe? I want to know. But no one ever answers that for me, and I think that's a real shame. It could be some damn interesting shit. But no, that's not really my problem with Fallout either. My problem with Fallout mainly is that, like every other video game I've ever fucking seen, its world building and storytelling capabilities are total ass. This is one of the dumbest stories I've ever heard, and I haven't played it because I don't fucking play video games. But if we got off our high horse here for a second, gamers, and we just admitted that Fallout was adapted into a legitimate form of art, like a novel or a movie, or now as we have it a TV show, it'd be ass. And now that in fact Fallout is a TV show, now we know what it would look like if a really shitty example of retrofuturism and science fiction was adapted into a form of art that I find a bit more legitimate, and the result is about as embarrassing and piss poor as you would expect. Like, who the fuck likes this? I mean, even the critical drinker likes it. I see nothing but positive acclaim for this ass-tastic dumpster pile, but not me. I'm here to say that this is dumb and you shouldn't be watching or playing Fallouts, because it's actively contributing to the death of science fiction as a genre. It's like really sad. So the first time I ever heard about Fallout, I think it was around 2015. I was probably in middle school, and one of the trailers for like Fallout 4 or something came out. I think it was the one where like there's this like beautiful suburb and then it gets incinerated or something. And I just remember feeling really sad about that. Like, you know, it's just like depressing shit. I was just like, wow, this shit looks depressing as fuck. Who the fuck wants to engage with a story where everyone just dies? Kind of point to a story like that, which I kind of stand by. I maintain that sci-fi stories are just bleak and depressing or kind of stupid. I've read some at this point that I kind of see like, oh, you know, I can see why people like this, but yeah, for the most part, I think it's just trying to be like edgy for spectacle's sake. And honestly, I find the society of Fallout prior to the nuclear devastation to be way more interesting and telling about Bethesda Studios' mindset than whatever happens after. So when I first heard about Fallout, I thought that the premise was that it's an alternate history scenario where in the 1950s, right, people go into fallout shelters and the Cold War happens and, you know, the nuclear exchange happens between us and the Soviet Union, and people stay in their fucking fallout shelters for like hundreds of years, 200, 300 years, then they emerge, and then it's like this futuristic society that's like the 50s, because that makes sense. That's a story that actually makes sense and would be logical to tell and would actually be a good story. And truth be told, there are some examples of Fallout shelter fiction I don't like. For instance, I don't like The Shelter, the Twilight Zone episode The Shelter, mainly just because Rod Serling seems to have way too much confidence that it's like actually scary. But to a modern observer, like myself, someone who doesn't live during the Cold War, there's really nothing scary anymore about a Soviet threat, because that time has passed. So it's not scary anymore to have an episode that's all about what if you and the neighbors, and there were 20 of you, and 5 of you wanted to get down into the fallout shelter, but the other 15 are trying to break in or whatever. That's not a scary scenario anymore, because the threat of nuclear Armageddon has passed. So I would say that's probably a weaker episode of Twilight Zone for me. Not one of the worst, but definitely dated, and more than a little overconfident in its ability to actually scare you. My favorite episode of Twilight Zone involving a nuclear scenario, in fact probably my favorite piece of media involving a fallout shelter of all time, has to be One More Pallbearer. It is hella underrated, but it is fucking phenomenal, because it is about man's capacity to scare himself effectively. It follows a deranged narcissist who basically gathers 3 of his enemies throughout life in a makeshift fallout shelter in the basement of his giant skyscraper, because he's like rich and successful and he thinks he can toy with these people, and he can basically convince them that the world is going to end. Now he knows that the world isn't actually going to end, but he's convinced them that the world is going to end, and they still choose when he says that he can make it so that they're the last 4 people on Earth and they'll survive and everyone else will die, but that they'll survive and be the last people alive, that they want to go home and be with their loved ones, and he stays behind, and he can't understand why they want to go home and be with their loved ones before they die, and then he ends up just buying into his own delusion. He ends up buying into his own scare tactics, into his own fear, and deluding himself into believing that the world is over, even though it's actually not. And that's a genius piece of storytelling, because it not only says something about the main guy, but it also says something about the culture of fear-mongering, of irrational fear, of fear of nuclear Armageddon, even when that scenario, all things considered, in the 1950s and 60s, was unlikely, because the Soviets did not want to die, and they knew that if they sent us nukes, we'd send them nukes. Mutually assured destruction. So ultimately, the fear of nuclear devastation is an irrational one. It is a moral panic. A lot like the fear of AI today. I don't really buy into the scare tactics around AI, because I think it's all bullshit. And I think ultimately, humanity will just stop using it because it's trash, and will recognize, hey, it was kind of a fun gimmick at first, but we're kind of sick of it now, and it'll get dated. And in like 70 or so years, we'll look back on these times and we'll go like, God, we sure were fucking naive back then. Damn, we sure were simpletons. Just like how we today will look back on, frickin' Vietnam propaganda or fucking, anti-Soviet shit and go, wow, that was stupid, har. We sure were stupid, naive fools back then. So I think it is very important to view media from that period of time with a sort of detached cynicism, and recognize that some of it is stupid, some of it is propaganda, that there are weaker and stronger versions of it that are better able to critique and deconstruct the ideas of that time than others. The Shelter being an example of a story that doesn't really deconstruct or examine the zeitgeist of the time at all, and One More Pallbearer being an example of an episode that really hella knocks it out of the park. Those aren't the only examples of fallout shelter related media, of course. One could argue it's an entire subgenre of science fiction. Obviously there's a Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser. There's a lot, because fallout shelters, as much as I dislike their existence as a kind of macabre symbol of war, they can provide for some interesting stories if they're utilized properly. For instance, the music video for New Frontier from Donald Fagen's The Night Fly is a particular favorite of mine. I think it's very charming in a lot of ways. The sound is really crisp, and it's just a nice little concept about this guy going down to his fallout shelter with his girlfriend, and Donald Fagen basically approaches fallout shelters with this sort of wistful nostalgia. It's just like, Yeah, they're stupid. We don't need them, but you know they can be fun to make believe in, and just have a nice night down in, and you just eat, you know, fucking canned chili and just like pretend like the world's ending. But you know, you're just having fun down there. It's fun shit, and I highly recommend New Frontier. It's a wonderful music video, and way, way, way better than Fallout. But getting back to Fallout. So I initially thought, in my naive optimism that Bethesda Studios could tell a competent science fiction story, was that the premise of Fallout was that in the 50s, the US and Soviets do exchange nukes, which, you know, whatever, one bad day, they decide to go at it, and the whole world is nuked, except for a few survivors in the Fallout shelters, and over time, technology progresses. We get robots, we get this futuristic stuff and futuristic weaponry and all this, but culture stagnates, because that's what a Fallout shelter would do. Culture would stagnate, because there would be no input from the outside world. So people, generation after generation, would keep acting like it was the 50s. There'd be 1950s decorations all over, the only furniture you could get. There'd be no supply lines, so everything would just look like the 50s. It'd all be the decor and sensibilities of the 50s. That's a fucking interesting concept, to imagine what it'd be like if for 200 years, from the 50s to like the 2150s or whatever, people had to stay in the same room for all time, and they just couldn't go outside, so it's just like everything stays the same. That's the premise of the Brendan Fraser movie Blast from the Past. But unfortunately, Fallout doesn't have as interesting an outlook as the fucking Brendan Fraser movie Blast from the Past. So instead what we get is a story told by people who don't understand how to effectively tell a believable alternate history story. So the actual premise of Fallout is that it doesn't happen in the 50s. There isn't a nuclear exchange in the 50s. Instead, it's in the 2150s. And prior to that, there's no nuclear exchange. And instead of the Cold War, we have some shit called the Resources War, which is basically just a stand-in for the Cold War. And obviously Fallout is trying to capture 1950s sensibilities, so it's still between us and Russia and China, except it's like trying to hide that and be like, oh no, it's not the Cold War, it's the Resources War, it's different, bruv. The main problem is that society doesn't fucking progress, and culture doesn't evolve for 100 fucking years, which is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. It's not that we start in the 50s, and then the bombs go off, and we stagnate culturally for 200 years, which is entirely fucking believable. Like, technology improves, we improve with computers and robots and shit, but that's not really important because culture has died, which would actually be a really grim and dark and interesting story. Instead, what we have is that it's 100 years after the 50s, so it's like 30 years from now, basically, and society and culture haven't progressed at all, despite the world just going on as usual, just like how, you know, the world did in our timeline, except like literally everyone still dresses and talks and sounds like it's the fucking 50s. And this just displays a complete lack of understanding of how like history works, how cause and effect work, how people work, how communication operates, like everything. Bethesda Studios is stupid as fuck. There is not a single other alternate history story I can even point to that just goes, yeah, the 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, they weren't different at all. They were just like the 50s the whole time. It was just a century of the 50s. That's not how time works. Things change because you have interactions between people and places and new events that happen. A really good example is Back to the Future Part 2, when Marty McFly changes history with the Sports Almanac, and he goes to the alternate 80s that's still kind of like our 80s, but it's a different 80s. But it sure as fuck isn't just like the 50s, because why would it be? Because time has passed, and things have changed, and things are going to be different, than they were in the past. Even though it's the future, it's an alternate present, if that makes sense. Things fucking change, so you wouldn't just have a century that just stays the same and everyone keeps talking the same and culture just stays like exactly the same. Unless you were in a closed environment like a Fallout shelter, which would make complete sense. But I guess Bethesda didn't fucking go that route. They went with the stupid route that it's just like the 50s for an entire century. That is some of the stupidest world building I've ever seen in anything ever. No Fallout fan can explain to me why that is. Why it's the 50s for an entire fucking century. Because of course you can't. That's fucking stupid. Like, the world just goes on, but everyone still drinks fucking Nuka-Colas and acts like, you know, it's like the fucking Andy Griffith show or whatever. Meantime, it's the fucking 90s, but like the alternate 90s are just like the 50s. But like, why though? Doesn't anyone come up with new, like, music, movies, anything, like, new and different? And so, like, culture can progress and evolve, because that is literally the case in every other alternate history story ever, except, like, really poorly told ones that have not seen the light of day, probably just gather dust on bookshelves because they're written by complete fucking hacks. Meanwhile, Fallout's a multi-billion-dollar franchise, and I guess, like, some people don't even read, like, real sci-fi. This is their only exposure to the genre, so they probably don't know much about what sci-fi can be like if it's actually written by competent people. Luckily, Fallout has a really easy get-out-of-jail-free card, and it can just go, well, what happened before the bombs dropped doesn't matter. This is set 200 years after that in the 2250s or whatever, and that's what we follow. So just, you know, disregard this really shitty lore and world building here, and just try and pretend like this is a competent story, even though the setup and the inciting incident makes, like, no fucking sense whatsoever, and it's just, like, total dog shit. And you'll be just, like, questioning, why the fuck was it the 50s for an entire century? But, you know, gamers don't think about that. They don't have the mental capacity to question, like, basic elements of the universe. That's why when I ask a Five Nights at Freddy's fan, hey, if this pizzeria is putting human bodies inside the costumes, don't the costumes ever, like, smell like a dead body inside? And the Five Nights at Freddy's fan will just be like, oh, well, yeah, but, like, it didn't result in the pizzeria being closed down or anything. You know, they just have dead corpses walking around everywhere. And I'm just like, you know, go play in the sandbox, yo. You clearly have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, and your media literacy skills are, like, fundamentally broken. And it's the same with Fallout, but Fallout pretends like it's not made for children, like it's like an actual science fiction story that I'm supposed to take seriously. So I will Fallout, believe me, I'll take you up on that. So, the core world building of Fallout is shit, and like I said, I don't give a fuck about what happens after the bombs. I'm really interested in the world that Fallout presents before the bombs. The society that those figures out on the lawn watching the cowpoke in the new Fallout TV show are witness to. Damn, I'm interested in that world. I'm not so interested in the post-apocalyptic shit. That shit can fuck right off. I'm interested in what happens before all that. What's the world like? What factors lead to it? Because ultimately what science fiction needs to excel at is competent world building. And it is a world of difference between shit like Rick and Morty or Watchmen or Fallout and really good, comprehensive, believable world building like Dune and Neuromancer, where you can have outrageous fucking elements like robot arms and human computers and all this shit, but it makes sense and it feels so fucking convincing and real because William Gibson and Frank Herbert are like actual fucking writers who give a shit about the believability and immersiveness of their worlds. Ultimately, Fallout needed to have good world building, and then I might give it some credit. I mean, I wouldn't give Bethesda Studios credit for making their story a video game. There's literally no excuse ever to do that, and you should just write a fucking novel if you have a really great idea. You know, like William Gibson does. But if the story was understandable or like remotely fucking comprehensible, I might give it a pass, but it is literally just nonsense that's designed to look cool, and it puts aesthetics at the expense of fucking believability or even like understanding. Basic comprehension. I don't know what the fuck is going on in this universe because it's just designed to look cool. Ooh, looky, it's Vault Boy. He looks like Mr. Monopoly. Isn't this cool? Isn't this cool, bro? No, because I don't get what the fuck happened. I'm about to completely ruin Fallout for you in like under 10 seconds, okay? So get ready for this. This is a question that no Fallout fan has ever been able to answer for me, no matter how many I ask. And I think ultimately it just comes down to it can't be answered. But see if you can answer it. Okay, just like the Five Nights at Freddy's plot hole about the rotting bodies and the costumes, here's a question about the Fallout universe. How the fuck does a society develop robot butlers and shit before they develop color TVs? Why the fuck does the Fallout universe have black and white TVs, but they got like robots and shit? At what point did someone in the Fallout universe go, hey, the world is in color, so we can make TVs in color, right? We can make a very rudimentary, basic part of a TV, a very basic part of a cathode ray TV that, you know, in the real world was introduced in like the 60s. But, you know, in this universe, the 60s, I guess, just never happened because technology only progresses in the ways that look aesthetically cool and not in the ways that would actually make any practical sense to society. Nobody goes, hey, we can make color TVs. No, let's make robot butlers first, because that seems easier. Which is easier, making a TV that projects in color or making a fucking robot? I think making a color TV is significantly easier and would chronologically happen first before you got to the robot servants. Even the fucking Jetsons gets this right. In the Jetsons, they have color TV, because of course they fucking do. Because the Jetsons would want to watch TV in color, not in black and white, because the world isn't in black and white. And when the Jetsons is better sci-fi than your fucking AAA big-timing sci-fi type series on all, you know, the gaming platforms, then that's probably a sign that your writing is ass and you don't understand how like basic technological shit works, and you should probably hang up your hat, go back to the fucking drawing board, because you can't world build for shit, Bethesda. Yeah, that's a question for all you Fallout fans. Answer me that in the comments below. Why in the Fallout universe are there robots, but there's not color TVs? Because it really just seems like they make aesthetic decisions and think about what would look cool before thinking about if what they're saying would actually make any sense or follow logically. Because, like, I'm pretty sure that every society in every conceivable timeline would probably develop color TVs before they would develop robots. But even that isn't actually my biggest gripe with Fallout, which, let's be honest, there are a lot of them, but that's just kind of a nitpick of the world building. Let's suppose for a moment that we ignore all the plot holes. The key problem with Fallout remains that it is an intrinsically conservative series that puts the aesthetics of the past over the objective of science fiction, which is to create an interesting, experimental, kind of hypothetical scenario that sheds some light on society or the human condition or something like that. And ultimately, Fallout is as empty and vapid and reactionary as anything made by the Daily Wire, as like the Candace Owens talk show. It is literally that regressive and empty and unwilling to explore interesting ideas or even entertain the process of thought and growth and change. I'm not saying that everyone at Bethesda Studios is a hardcore reactionary or anything, and I don't think that you can't potentially make a good retro-futuristic 1950s type series that is set in a weird sort of universe that's kind of like the 50s. In fact, I just gave you a great idea for one. Imagine what it'd be like if society had to kind of stagnate in fallout shelters from the 1950s onward. That'd be a great story, actually. Someone should write that and make it a great novel. It's too bad Fallout doesn't tell that story. I have no problems with retrofuturism, and there are lots of cases where I actually kind of like it. I even like the Jetsons. I don't mind the Jetsons. It actually makes more sense than fucking Fallout. And that, it's sad to say, but I really do like the Jetsons. The Jetsons is coated with the sauce, and it's cool and shit. I mean, more work goes into it. You gotta animate George Jetson's nose. What's Bethesda Studios gotta do? Just scam their fans with fucking Nuka-Cola? Yeah, right, like I'm gonna respect that shit. Ultimately, the problem with Fallout is that it's only interested in examining the 1950s as an era on the most surface level terms possible, and its exact premise about there being a mutual exchange between the Soviet Union and the US is ultimately indicative of anti-communist fear-mongering and the exact sort of moral panic I talked about earlier, and that was never going to happen. That's not the biggest social problem of the 1950s, you absolute rubes. For the most part, it was only talked about or suggested as a remote possibility by deranged fucking crackpots like Andrew McCarthy. The actual issue and societal evil of the 1950s that any retro-futuristic or science fiction piece ostensibly based in the era should choose to address is obviously fucking McCarthyism. The really interesting thing about the 1950s is that it was damn good at brainwashing Americans, because we are still to this day telling imaginary stories about a nuclear conflict that actually never would have happened because the Soviets weren't insane, deranged people who wanted to kill everybody, and really neither were we. The human species has an innate self-preservation instinct that will probably perpetuate us for a long, long damn time, and any time that people say it's going to be the end of the world, probably not. And it's not to say it's going to be fun to keep going on the way we have been going on, but we are just going to keep going on the way we've been going on. And things will change. Things might get better. Things might get worse. There isn't going to be an easy out for us. There isn't going to be one climactic end of the world, big day, judgment day type scenario where everyone just dies simultaneously. That's too easy for us. We are going to suffer a long, long time for what a flawed species we are. So it's basically going to turn into Dune. And that's okay, because Dune is cool as fuck and Frank Herbert's goated with the sauce. But that's besides the point. My point is that a nuclear scenario, if it's done in science fiction, has to be handled really fucking believably for it to win me over, and something like Fallout doesn't handle it even remotely. If you're going to make a science fiction series set in a retro-futuristic 1950s type America, you should decide to actually focus on the issues that mattered, like racism or homophobia or misogyny, all of which were a more tangible and real threat to the sanctity of American values and the safety of the American people than fucking communists. Like, what's a communist gonna do? I'm thinking the Soviets were like fucking racist and did Jim Crow and shit. Now that's on us. So any piece of media set in the 1950s, or a setting that is like the 1950s, in addition to, having fun cowboy antics and like this fun, fun aesthetic type flair that like brags around, ooh, looky, it's the 50s. it also needs to address shit like racism and stuff. And it can't, like, do it through metaphors. Like, I know Fallout has that thing with, like, the fucking robot people and how, oh, you know, they're like a subclass or whatever, or, oh no, the ghouls are a subclass or whatever. I mean, like, actually have a story where it's like, you know, a black guy gets treated unfairly because this world keeps being in the 50s and it refuses to change. Actually inspect the intricacies and the nuances and the subtle features of a retrofuturistic society that refuses to give up on its ignorance and its problems and its inherent flaws. Like, actually fucking do that. But, you know, Bethesda isn't going to do that because its audience is all a bunch of greasy, fat white guys and they just want their gaming fix. Ooh, I need my G Fuel now, baby! Much like all other cases, Back to the Future really excels in this case as a piece of time travel sci-fi media because Marty McFly goes back to the 50s, and it's kind of fun. It's a fun time for him, but at the same time, the movie, which keep in mind is just meant to be like a fun little commercial blockbuster that it's not trying to say anything deep or anything, it's willing to point out that, like, yeah, Hill Valley back in the day was racist, and the current mayor is, like, you know, just like working at minimum wage and barely making ends meet. He's like, I'm going to run for mayor one day. And someone's like, you know, oh, I'm a racist. I don't believe that. And so, like, even Back to the Future is like it's just like a fun popcorn movie, is willing to admit that, like, yeah, while Marty might be having a fun time with all this kitschy 50s shit, at the same time, it's not so great for the black people, which is, like, accurate. So, like, Back to the Future does better than Fallout 2. Which isn't saying much. I love Back to the Future. Way better than Fallout. And if you like the 50s, just watch fucking Back to the Future. I think it's really sad that contemporary media of the 1950s, like EC Comics shock suspense stories with brilliant deconstructions and criticisms of racism, like Undercover and The Guilty and Hate, all of which deconstruct, like, the KKK and lynchings and anti-Semitism, respectively, are not given the respect they deserve. And creators like Bill Gaines and Wally Wood and Jack Davis and Harvey Kurtzman and all these fantastic creators of the 50s are outright ignored, and their contributions to popular culture are just, like, given the boot. And we don't pay any attention to that shit, but we give all this credit to Bethesda Studios' shitty fucking pastiche of 1950s culture, while simultaneously demonizing the 1950s, even though if you read EC Comics shock suspense stories, you know that there are, like, sane people from that period of time who saw the evils of the world and were willing to call them out and confront them directly during the time period in which they actually took place, which is fucking amazing and highly commendable. It is absolutely extremely incredible and cool what EC Comics was able to achieve with those stories, and I cannot recommend shock suspense stories enough if you're actually into 1950s culture, if you're actually interested in exploring the time period, not the fake, aestheticed out, fucking goofy ass future that Fallout presents, but the actual period of time through the lens of horror and science fiction. I cannot fucking recommend EC Comics enough. Holy shit, read EC Comics, or you're an absolute lunatic. This is why I say that Fallout is ultimately a piece of dumb, escapist, bullshit fantasy media that just tries to placate people. And I find it really weird that it's embraced by progressive crowds, or seems to be anyway, and progressives and conservatives seem to agree that it's, like, decent or something. Because the world that I see in the Fallout TV show, in that first scene, where it's like a 1950s society, and it's like a birthday party, but, you know, there's all the white people just, like, agreeing and palling up with the black people, I'm like, well, this just doesn't make any sense, because if you still have black and white TVs, you probably still have a very narrow-minded black and white mentality of the world. I'm not saying that everyone in a retrofuturistic story should be a frothing bigot or racist or whatever, because as the existence of EC Comics proves, there were sane people in that time period who saw evil for what it was and called it out and didn't take any bullshit or put up with that. But at the same time, I think it's extremely cowardly for shit like Fallout to just present all the fun shit, all the frosting, and not present like any of the actual like interesting topics and societal problems that would make like for a good comprehensive science fiction story that like science fiction is actually good at presenting. It presents a sanitized fake version of history and ignores real shit that is worth talking about and making stories about. You should confront it head on. You shouldn't be a coward. If you're going to make a story set in a 1950s type setting, I'm going to expect you to go the extra mile like Harlan Ellison or Frank Herbert would, and not be a little baby about it and actually like talk about shit. But you know, it's Bethesda Studios and they just want to appeal to the lowest common denominator. So their vision of the 50s is just, oh, you had like a cowboy at your birthday party. Yeehaw. Yeah, that was all the 50s was. It's not like fucking Allen Ginsberg, Ralph Ellison, any of that. No. It's just a yeehaw birthday party all day long. Yippee. So, yeah, that's why I say Fallout is dumb, because it just wants to present the aesthetic of the 50s without doing any of the actual legwork or world building or having to confront any of the potentially uncomfortable topics that something like that would address. Just, yeah, above all else, don't play Fallout. It's fucking embarrassing. Holy shit. What a piss poor alternate history retro-futurist type story that just doesn't make any fucking sense. Its world building is ass. And it's just a coward shit. Blatantly conservative propaganda that only paints the 50s in the most favorable possible light for like America. But meantime it's like, oh, the Soviets and Chinese blew us up. Even though like that was never gonna happen. So like, I don't even know what the fuck it's supposed to be. It's embarrassing. And it's really embarrassing to still see people talk about the Fallout TV show like it's like good or something. Just dump this franchise in the fucking dumpster and go read Neuromancer. It's fucking awesome. Go on an adventure with Case and Molly and have a good fucking time. Okay, well that's tonight's video. Good night and all that. And until next time, pleasant dreams.